All right, everybody. You should be looking at your sheet that looks like this. We're going to talk about some of the specific people that attended the Constitutional Convention. Then, what you're going to do is you're going to grab one of the cutouts and see if you can match it up to the people that you have. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just a moment. So, you're going to notice that the little line at the top, that's going to be where the name of the person goes. And then the bullet points that are below those are going to be where you write down your information about each of these people that attended the Constitutional Convention. You're also going to notice the numbers. That's where your little figures are going to go. And I'll talk to you about that here in just a moment. So what you're going to do is you're going to get one of these when you're done taking your notes, and you're going to cut out your figures. You're going to notice where it says glue down at the bottom. That's where you're going to fold it up and put it directly onto your notes. And you're going to have some pop-up notes that look like this. Like this, more accurately. So this is kind of what we're going for. And ask any questions if you get stuck. Don't hesitate. And so you'll do this at the end of, you'll do the gluing at the end of the lecture here. So a couple of things that I want you to think about, okay, as we take a look at this. This is going to be kind of that remote learning setting that we're starting to practice. So you're going to be taking notes. So I recommend that you pause the video when you need to write things down. You can go back, do all of that kind of stuff, because you need to gather this information one way or another, and this is the way that we're choosing to do it this time. So these are just some questions to start thinking about. It's 1787. Some of our founders are hanging out at a tavern the night before the Constitutional Convention. Use your notebook to answer these questions. What are some changes they want to make to the Articles of Confederation? You think about things like taxation, think about things like shared power between states and the federal government, the ability to enforce laws, settling disputes between states, that kind of stuff. What are some potential arguments that they might get into when creating the new government? We've talked about the arguments between some of the states. Continue to think about some of those. And how do you think that they solved some of their arguments? So how did they do it just in terms of being able to figure things out? So we've got our picture here. You see a couple of people, hopefully, that you're familiar with. You've got guys like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, to name a few. And there were a lot more there as well. So we're going to take a look at some of the most notable people that were at the convention, and this is just to name a few. So here we are, the Constitutional Convention. The leaders who created the United States government. So here's some information just to get started. The Articles of Confederation, they were determined to be too weak. We've talked about that. That's what we've been quizzing on, and so on. And that's why the Constitutional Convention has been called, essentially. Convention is held in Philadelphia in 1787. It was during the summer. It was extremely warm. And not to mention, these people didn't wear the coolest clothes when it comes to a hot summer. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as time goes on. Last thing, the delegates decide to create a new government rather than fix the Articles. They were going there to fix the Articles of Confederation. They end up basically taking that entire document and saying, we're going to redo this whole thing. So you could say that this group of people overthrew the current government and started a new one. So here are some of the leaders that I just want us to get to know as we approach some of this information. The first guy we're going to talk about is good old George Washington. George Washington, there he is. He was a delegate from Virginia, which means he was representing the state of Virginia. He essentially was elected president of the convention, so he was the guy that really kept things going. He wasn't the president of the United States, just the president of this meeting. He didn't really speak a whole lot. Basically, he was the guy that people would listen to. They demanded his respect, essentially. Or he demanded their respect, I should say. He was coming off the Revolutionary War, probably one of the most famous people on the planet at the time. One of the things that it was really important is when it was time to ratify or approve the new Constitution, basically his support was really, really important. People looked up to him, people respected him, and that was really one of the big things that we want to remember when we're talking about his presence at the Constitutional Convention. Next person we're going to talk about is James Madison. Here's a picture of James Madison. Not a very tall fellow, but very, very bright, very smart individual who later does become president of the United States. So he was also a delegate from Virginia. We have to remember that Virginia had the largest population of any state at the time. It was also a slave-holding state, so we want to keep that in mind as we move forward as well. Basically, he was what they called the father of the Constitution. He wrote down more notes by far than anybody. I mean, upwards of 1,000 pages of notes that he took during this. And he was probably one of the most well-versed about just different types of governments and different things representing government. So they called him the father of the Constitution because he spoke up a lot and really had a lot of insights for people during this convention. He was the author of the Virginia Plan, and this kind of becomes the blueprint for the Constitution. The Virginia Plan, we know, was all about creating a Congress based on population because, again, it was the largest state during this time. So they were like, yeah, we want some more power. Then we've got our guy, Alexander Hamilton, probably one of the most famous founding fathers due to the popularity of the music called Hamilton. So there he is, Alexander Hamilton. He was a delegate from New York. He was representing the state of New York. And he was like, listen, we got to replace the Articles of Confederation. He was a huge supporter of a strong central government. He felt that there needed to be a strong central government in order to keep order and really unify the 13 states. He wrote many of the Federalist Papers, which is one of our vocab terms, and this is called for the ratification of the Constitution. And we'll talk about the people that were considered Federalists versus anti-Federalists. And you might think about his support for the strong central government really as an indicator of who would be considered a Federalist versus an anti-Federalist. And then, of course, my man Benjamin Franklin, probably my favorite founding father. He was the oldest guy at the Constitutional Convention, but he was involved in everything. Really, again, famous around the world. It was amazing. He was a delegate from Pennsylvania, and like I said, the oldest delegate at the convention. Now, one of the things that we have to remember is that some of these founding fathers believed that slavery needed to be ended in this country, and he was one of the individuals that argued for the abolition of slavery. He even started anti-slave societies in Pennsylvania, so it was really neat to see his argument against particularly the Southern delegates that were really trying to promote and gain more power through the institution of slavery. He wasn't really all that happy with some of the parts of the Constitution, and we'll talk about some of that later on. But he really was like, I don't think anybody can do much better than this. So really, you see that he didn't think it was perfect, but again, he thought it was good enough to move forward with ratification. The next guy we're going to talk about is old Roger Sherman. Maybe a name you're not quite as familiar with. There he is. But he was the delegate from Connecticut. Now, he was the guy that kind of was like the compromiser between the Virginia and the New Jersey plan, which really was one of the biggest arguments that erupted during the Constitutional Convention. He supported what becomes known as the Connecticut Compromise, also known as the Great Compromise, of a bicameral legislature. Remember, that's a two-house legislature with the House of Representatives and the Senate. He was one of only two men to sign the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. It's pretty neat when you can see his name on three different documents, and there's not a whole lot of other people that have that prominence. I would challenge you to look up who was the other guy. All right. And then we've got a guy named George Mason, again, one of our lesser-known founding fathers, but there is a university named after him. There's a picture of him, pretty sweet hairdo he's got there. Again, another delegate from Virginia. You're noticing that Virginia sent a lot of delegates from Virginia because they had a huge population. Um, he was one of the guys that was like, listen, I'm not going to sign the Constitution until there's a Bill of Rights because the Constitution basically says here's all the rights that the government has, all the power that the government has. The Bill of Rights was something that he said we got to make sure that people have rights outlined in this document as well. Really, the Bill of Rights later on becomes based on Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights. Remember, each state had their own governments, and this was a reflection of some of that. And we'll talk about the Bill of Rights a little bit later on. So, some things to think about. The Constitution established a government that shared power between the national and state governments, protected the rights of states, and provided a system for orderly change through amendments to the Constitution itself. So you got to start thinking about how can the Constitution be changed? Because as time goes on, new things arise. Some things are shed from the Constitution. So I want you to look at this information and figure out what we're talking about here. And then think about this idea of why is it important to share power between the states and the central government. So again, a couple of big ideas to think about, something that you might even consider writing down because that's one of the best ways to remember things. But again, let me know if you got questions. Hopefully you've got your piece filled out. Now it's time to go to the cutouts, get them all cut out, put them on there, and create this cool three-dimensional style of notes. All right. If you got any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you when I see you.